So today marks the 20th anniversary of 9/11, which was the most devastating terrorist attack that ever happened in this country. There were nearly 3,000 people who died, mostly in New York City, and thousands more were injured or suffered later from illnesses due to, for example, working with the debris that was toxic. And I'm pretty sure most of us have memories of where we were when we first heard the news and what we thought and what we felt. So one memory I have is when I first saw the footage on the TV of one of the planes flying right into the Twin Towers. I felt disbelief. I thought, this can't be real. This must be a disaster movie. Because how could anyone do such a thing? And especially in the busiest city in the most powerful country in the world, with the incredible military that we have, how could they get away with it? So I had a hard time believing it, but when it finally sunk in and I realized, yes, it did happen, I felt really devastated and very, very sad and very disturbed as well. And at that point in time, I was in Europe. I was in the middle of a teaching tour. So every couple of days or every week, I was getting on a plane and going somewhere. And I kind of sometimes thought, am I crazy for doing this? Maybe I should cancel, stop flying around. But I didn't. I kept going. I remember the first time I was flying after 9/11, I was sitting in the departure lounge waiting to get on the plane and kind of looking out the corner of my eyes at the other passengers waiting to get on the plane as well and thinking, yeah, most of them look harmless, but that guy over there, he looks like he might be from the Middle East. I wonder what he's got in his suitcase, what's going on in his mind. Maybe he's going to hijack this plane. I mean, it's horrible to think like that, but it was just such a scary and traumatic time. And it's hard to control the mind, even in the best of times. So anyway, over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of articles about 9/11 from different perspectives. Some of them are kind of analyzing America's responses in the wake of this tragic circumstance, and what things went well and what things did not go well. And there have been interviews with people who were affected by the events, people who lost loved ones, children who lost a parent. And today there was coverage of the memorial ceremony that took place at Ground Zero. That happens every year. And they read the names of all the people who died. Today, President Biden and his wife were there. And I saw in the BBC an article about a trial that's taking place at Guantanamo Bay. Some of the men who were suspected of plotting the attacks are on trial. I hadn't heard of that before. Anyway, I hadn't read all the articles, but one essay I did read, and I found it quite compelling. It was in the New York Times yesterday. It was written by a Muslim American author named Laila Lamani. And she describes a recent visit she paid to the National September 11 Memorial and Museum. So I figure that's at Ground Zero in New York City. And she writes, the museum's mission is to educate the public about the terrorist attacks, documenting their impact and exploring their significance. But on a recent visit, I was struck by the emphasis that had been put on recreating the day itself in sensory detail. So visitors to this museum get a taste of what it was like to be at that site on that day. There's videos of, the crashes and then sounds of sirens and witnesses' exclamations of shock and news flashes and so on. But she goes on to say that She notices the absence of sort of complete and accurate information about some of the events that led up to 9/11 and also those that came afterwards. She goes on to say, in this place, the memory of September 11 is fixed in time, detached from almost everything that happened before or after. As I walked through the exhibits, I felt sorrow for the victims, anger at the perpetrators, admiration for the heroism of emergency workers, and even respect for the local government's swift response. But at no point did I feel engaged in critical interrogation or even historical instruction. The museum offered a simplistic, straightforward narrative of what was in fact a paradigm-shifting event. And I couldn't help but think last night when we were having our class and talking about having ceased, that interesting phenomenon, that this is a good example. Those attacks that happened on 9/11, they happened, they ceased, they're in the past, but they have been continuously, since that time and even now and continuing into the future, producing results, producing effects. That's a good example of that particular kind of phenomena. And then she went on to talk about some of the tragic and even harmful consequences of 9/11. In the United States, September 11 led directly to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the passing of the Patriot Act, the authorization for use of military force, the use of warrantless surveillance programs, and special registration of immigrants and foreign students from Muslim countries. So she said at one point, being a Muslim, she's particularly aware of the consequences on Muslim people. Outside the United States, the attacks served as justification for the 20-year war in Afghanistan, the invasion and occupation of Iraq, the indefinite detention of prisoners at Guantanamo Bay, the use of torture at Abu Ghraib and elsewhere, the killing of thousands of US and foreign service members, the periodic bombing of Pakistan, Yemen, Syria, and Somalia, the deaths of over 800,000 people, including 335,000 civilians, and the displacement of an estimated 38 million people. So, of course, the loss of almost 3,000 people in New York City and Washington, D.C. on that day is terrible. It's a horrible crime. And the government did need to take action to try to ensure that such attacks would never happen again. But did they take the wisest actions? Was their response really the best? Because yesterday there was another article that mentioned some things that could have been done. This writer said, Bush could have rallied the country to end its reliance on Middle Eastern oil, a reliance that both financed radical American enemies and kept the US enmeshed in the region. While attacking al-Qaeda militarily, Bush also could have called for enormous investments in solar energy, wind energy, nuclear power, and natural gas. It could have been transformative for the economy, the climate, and Bush's historical standing. So looking back, of course, we can think this way, but at the time, it seems like the government was just overwhelmed and confused and just trying to do the best they could, but it didn't turn out so well. So back to Lila's article. She says, the story America told about itself after September 11 was one of heroism and resilience in the aftermath of a brutal attack. The invasion of other countries and the interruption of their political destinies had no place in it. Even now, 20 years later, the story hasn't changed. There are no ceremonies to honor the foreigners who died in US wars, no memorials to victims of torture, No museums to house artifacts from hollowed out buildings or bombed funeral processions. No exhibits on the lessons that ought to be drawn from such spectacular failures. So, not to blame, not to feel angry, not to feel, oh, things should have been done that weren't done, things that were done shouldn't have been done. That doesn't help right at this point in time. But I thought it would be really nice to just do some meditation um, on the four measurable thoughts, which are for all sentient beings, but we can think in particular of the victims of 9/11, the people who died or were injured or affected by the events of that day, but also for those who've suffered since that time, who lost their lives, who lost their homes, lost family members, loved ones, and as a result of some of the decisions that were made and actions that were carried out in response to 9/11. So this will just be a short meditation. But I'll recite the prayer of the four immeasurable thoughts and just spend a few moments contemplating each of those beautiful thoughts and extend them to all living beings, in particular those who've suffered in this tragic event. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering, meaning happiness of being in fortunate situations in this and all future lives, and eventually attaining perfect peace, liberation, and enlightenment. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and aversion that hold some close and keep others distant. And let's dedicate this positive energy to, of course, all the people and other beings who've died and suffered as a result of 9/11, but also that in the future that there will never again be terrorist attacks, wars, conflicts, large and small, and all other forms of violence, even the thought of violence. May all of these completely cease forever. And then tomorrow we have this Sharing the Dharma Day, and the theme of that has been compassion for a long time now. And I thought that since I'm leading a meditation before Venerable Children's talk, I could lead a meditation on compassion again on this particular topic, thinking of the victims of 9/11, specifically focusing on them and meditating on compassion. So that'll be a longer meditation than what we just did. Those, if you're interested. Thank you.